In this video, we're going to look at the key techniques that you need to know to help you manage your toolpaths. Let's go ahead and open the file we want to use for this example. So we'll click on Open an existing file. From the project folder, I'm going to load widget 24x24 toolpath, hit Open, and now we want to head over to the Toolpath tab so we can access our Toolpath list. To do that, I can either click on the icon here to switch to the Toolpath tab, or the shortcut key for this is the F12 function key on the keyboard. By hitting that, it automatically closes the Design tab on the left and opens the Toolpath tab, as you can see on the right there. Depending which product you're using, your Toolpath tab may look slightly different than the one you can see here with either more or less icons. Essentially though, the Toolpath tab is always split into three different areas. The material setup at the top, where we define our XYZ 0 position that we're going to use on the CNC and tell the software how thick the material is. The Toolpath operations is the middle section. This includes the different strategies that we can access, along with various editing tools for the Toolpath and the ability to preview and save. And then finally at the bottom we have our Toolpath List, and this is what we're going to primarily concern ourselves with in this video. Looking at the list for this part, we can see different sets of information. On the right you can see the name the toolpath was given when it was calculated. In the middle you can see an icon which gives you a rough idea of the tool that's been used, so you can see for text profile and hatch profile it's a V-bit, and for the other toolpaths in this case it's an end mill. And on the left we have a checkbox here which allows us to switch on and off the visibility of each individual toolpath. To do this we just simply check the box there, put the check mark into it, and you can see that in the 2D view a representation of that toolpath has now been switched on. If we go over to view and tile the windows vertical so we can see the 2D and 3D view, you can see a representation of that toolpath also is shown in the 3D view. If I check it off, then that disappears from both views. If I check it on, then it reappears again. It's also possible to switch on the visibility of more than one toolpath at a time. For instance, I can individually switch on additional toolpaths, or at the top here we have this kind of global box where I can click that to switch them all off, or click that to switch them all on, and you can see check marks have appeared next to each entry in the list now. In some situations it'll be advantageous for you to be able to have the toolpath visible but not necessarily see it displayed in the 2D view. You can do this by unchecking the box here, Show 2D Previews, in the bottom right hand corner. If we uncheck that, you can see the toolpaths are still visible, the check marks are still there, I can still see them in the 3D view, but now they're no longer displayed in the 2D view. That makes it easy for me to perhaps see my vectors, or perhaps to select something from the 2D view if I want to. If we check that back on, they'll reappear, and you'll notice there's another option at the bottom here which allows us to display the toolpath preview slightly differently in the 2D view. What I'm going to do is just maximize the 2D view here. I'm going to hit F on the keyboard to fit that. I'm just going to undraw most of the toolpaths here, and perhaps we'll just select the pocket toolpath and make that visible. Now you can see if we zoom into the 2D view that it's showing me the lines for that toolpath, and that's helpful to me because I can see the direction and how they're filling in the space, but sometimes I want to see the exact area that's being cut, and to do that we can use this solid option here. If I check that, then what the software is going to do is shade in the area that's being machined and display that as this kind of bluish grey colour that you can see. And if we zoom into the 2D view, you can see how that's showing me with the tool geometry that that particular tool is going to leave radii in the corners of those pockets. And I would expect that, but this is just a good way for this to reinforce me of that being the case. This is also very helpful if I'm not sure whether a tool is going to fit into a certain gap, because I can use this solid display mode in order to really interrogate that and make sure whether it's going to work, or perhaps whether I need a smaller tool or to edit my geometry. So solid option, quite useful, and you'll probably see that used in a number of the tutorials. Here I'm just going to uncheck that now. We'll go back to our standard 2D preview. Now at this stage it's important to take a moment to discuss the difference between a visible toolpath and the selected toolpath. At any time we can select a single toolpath from the list by clicking on it. In this stage I can see the selected toolpath shown in bold is this one called Profile Cutout. If I click on any of the others, they'll be highlighted in blue there, and that will become the selected toolpath, and you can see it shows me the vectors that are being used for that in the 2D view when I click on it. Clicking off the name of the toolpath will remove the highlight, but you'll notice it's still got bold text and it's still the selected toolpath. The important thing here really is just to know that the selected toolpath is not necessarily the same as the visible toolpaths. We can have multiple visible toolpaths, we can only ever have one single selected toolpath. Why this is important will become more apparent as we work through some of the editing functions that are available to us. Another useful feature of the toolpath list is the ability to hover the cursor, the mouse, over any of the toolpath names, pause for a second, and a tooltip in a box will appear, as you can see here. As we hover over there, that shows me the tool I'm using, the tool number, the feeds and speeds that I've selected, the max depth of cut for that toolpath, and also the estimated time based on those feeds and speeds and the toolpath length. Very useful way for me to quickly see information about any of the toolpaths that I've already calculated. Another option from within the list is to go over any toolpath and right mouse click in order to bring up this menu that you can see. This allows me to access various functions that we're going to look at in a moment, but also I have different options here at the top if I hover over these in order to display and toggle the visibility of the toolpaths in different ways than we've looked at already. For instance, in this case, if I go over show, then I can show this toolpath, which will switch on its visibility, show only this, which will switch on its visibility and switch off all the others, show all but this, which would switch on all the others and make sure that toolpath remained invisible, or show all. So again, these are just different ways that I may want to toggle the visibility of the toolpaths. Coming further down, then I've got various options to access some of the functions to work with that toolpath. I can edit it, I can rename the toolpath, I can make a duplicate copy of it, I can recalculate all, and I can also delete that toolpath. Now 4 out of these 5 functions are also available as icons, which we'll look at in a moment. The one that isn't is the ability to rename the toolpath. If we click on that, then you'll see the text for the toolpath names become highlighted, and I can change the name here if I want. I could delete text, I could go ahead and add additional information. Perhaps we might want to put in there the tool that's being used so that we can reference that when we save the part. I just click in the space in the background in order to accept the new name that I've given the toolpath. So once again, just to reiterate that, right mouse click on any toolpath brings up this menu here in order to access those different functions there. Now let's go ahead and look at edit, duplicate, recalculate all and delete by using the icons that we've got here. So if I hover over these, you can see edit, duplicate toolpath, delete toolpath and recalculate all. So exactly the same functions, just accessible in different ways. Now edit, duplicate and delete will always work on the selected toolpath. So this is where the visibility of the toolpaths has no relevance at all. So I can just uncheck the box there. None of the toolpaths are visible, but whichever one is selected is what is going to be acted on when we click on one of those icons. So let's say for instance I wanted to edit our pocket toolpath. I would click to select that in the list, and then I can click on the icon here to edit the toolpath. When we do that, the software will open the toolpath form. I can change any of the parameters in here and hit calculate, and a new toolpath will be created based on that new set of parameters. I'm just going to close this for the moment here because I don't want to make any changes to that. Another way that I can edit a toolpath without using the icon or the right mouse click is just to double click on it from the list. So if I hover over that and double left click, then it will do the same thing, opening the toolpath form, allowing me to make changes, including picking a different tool, setting a new cut depth, or altering any of the other parameters, including the name, hitting calculate and creating a different version of that toolpath. In some cases, I may want to create a duplicate of a toolpath, perhaps to save time in entering the same set of information if I wanted to apply it to a different set of vectors, or perhaps if I wanted to just change 1 or 2 things within it, maybe to compare results. To make a duplicate is very easy. Again, we just select the one we want to duplicate from the list, click on the icon here, Duplicate Toolpath. We could also access this through the right mouse click menu if you remember. When we click on that, it will create a copy of that toolpath immediately below it in the toolpath list, adding a number in parentheses showing me that that is a different version of that toolpath, and that would just count up if I created additional ones. Now we could take that duplicate, make any changes we wanted to it, recalculate it, and essentially we've got a completely new toolpath. To delete anything in the list, again, we would just select the one we want to delete. In this case, I'll take the duplicate we just made, which is already selected, come up and click on the icon here to delete the toolpath, and you can see that will just disappear straight away. As you calculate and preview toolpaths, it's fairly typical to find some things that you may want to change. Perhaps you might want to leave a larger space between the objects you're cutting out, or make an object bigger in order to allow a tool to fit more cleanly between the different gaps. Anytime you make a change to the geometry, you need to make sure that you recalculate the toolpaths to respect it. Now you can either do that individually by editing each toolpath and hitting the Calculate button, or the quicker way to do it after you've made changes to your design is to just come up and click on the icon here, Recalculate All Toolpaths. When we do that, it's going to work through the toolpath list, recalculating each toolpath in turn, picking the same set of vectors that it had before, and therefore taking into account any changes in size or position. So let's click on the icon here for this part and see what happens. I can see that all the toolpaths have become highlighted. I can see they've been recalculated here. And if there are any warnings the software needs to give me, for instance on this part we have a profile cutout that goes slightly past the full thickness of our part, which is okay, that was deliberate, but it's important the software warns me about that so I can say yes, I intended to do that and hit OK. And once any warnings it needs to give you have been worked through, then it'll tell you that all toolpaths have been successfully recalculated, and you can go ahead and hit OK, knowing that every single one of those toolpaths has now effectively been refreshed to respect any changes to the geometry. The Recalculate option is also very useful if you've set your part up to take advantage of the Vector Selector option that's available in Toolpath Strategies for selecting geometry that's going to be machined. Now earlier in the video we talked about the fact that there's a difference between the visible toolpaths and the selected toolpath, and I just want to take a moment to show you a couple of areas that are important where that would affect you. Now both these areas have their own tutorial videos to cover them in detail, but I'll just show you them quickly here so that you're aware of why this visibility and selected toolpath is so crucial. If I come up and click on the icon to preview the toolpaths, it'll automatically put us into the 3D view and open the form here that allows us to choose how we want to animate these toolpaths in a piece of virtual material. Now here you can see we have a button that says Preview Selected Toolpath, so if I click that it will preview whichever single toolpath I have selected, and then also you'll see I've got a button here that says Preview Visible Toolpaths, and there that would just preview any that I had checked. So for instance, if I wanted to not preview the drill or the cutout but preview these first three, then I can make sure those three are visible, click on the button to preview visible toolpaths, and that's just going to show me the result of those three toolpaths. So that's one of the areas where this ability to have visible toolpaths or a selected toolpath is important. Let's just close that now, come back to the 2D view, and the other one is the Save Toolpath. When we come into here, again we've got an option to output all visible toolpaths to one file, so as long as I have multiple toolpaths selected that share the same tool, or I'm using a tool changing post-processor, I'll be able to use that option to select multiple toolpaths to output. Or if that's unchecked, then the software is just going to use whatever the selected toolpath is to populate the list of toolpaths to be saved when I go ahead and execute that function. When we get to the stage that we're ready to save toolpaths, the order of the list can be quite important to us. Now although I can choose the toolpath in whatever order I want, typically it's more intuitive to actually have the list in the order that I plan to machine these in, and often it's beneficial for me to group together similar tools so that I can easily save them into a single file and take advantage of that. To change the order of the list, I can just select the toolpath I want to move and then use the arrows here in order to move it up or down one place in the list. If I click down, it goes down one. If I click up, it goes up one. In this case, it may be advantageous for me to move that drill toolpath above the two toolpaths that use the V bits, so that now I will pocket and drill with the same tool, then I'll machine these two with my V bit, and then finally I'd have a toolpath to cut the part out. Again, it's not essential to change this order because you can save the toolpaths in any order that you want, but it's typically much more intuitive to make sure that your toolpath list is ordered in the order that you plan to actually machine these and group them together in files. Finally, the last thing I want to look at in this video is the Toolpath Summary. If we click on this icon here, what the software is going to do is take any visible toolpaths, so any with the check marks in, and populate this summary list and give me an estimate of their machining time at the top area here, and at the bottom give me the opportunity to add notes to any individual toolpath. If I want, I can change the visibility by switching on additional toolpaths, or we could just toggle them all on or off again to populate it with the complete list of toolpaths that I have. So coming back to the top of the form, I can see that the software is giving me estimates of how long it thinks that each of these toolpaths is going to take to cut, and also an estimate of the total machining time here for all the visible toolpaths. Now this estimate is fairly simplistic in that it's purely based on the length of the toolpath and the speed that we've told the software that we'd like to get the machine to cut that at. Of course, that speed is essentially theoretical because we don't know exactly how our CNC machine is going to behave. Every CNC machine works differently, they accelerate and decelerate differently, they handle corners, 2D moves and 3D moves in different ways. So all those different things can affect the actual time that it takes for the part to cut. Now there are a couple of bits of information that we can provide the software to help it make these as accurate as possible. The first is simply to tell it the speed the machine moves between retracts in the toolpath. So when the tool lifts up and it moves at its fastest rate possible to get to the next position so that it can plunge and carry on machining, that's called the rapid rate. So we can set that to be an appropriate value for our machine. So in this case, I'll just pick 600 inches per minute. We can change the units there by using the drop down if we want. Now that helps a little bit in making this more accurate, but more important to me is the scale factor. The scale factor essentially lets me plug in a value which is going to tweak these to make them more accurate for my machine and even potentially for the particular type of toolpath I'm working on. And how you would use this is you would typically set the scale factor first of all to be 1. You'd see how long the software thought it was going to take to cut based on the speeds and feeds and the length of the toolpath, and then when you actually run these you would make a note of how long they take to cut. If they take twice as long to cut as the estimate that you're getting here, then you'd know that you could enter a scale factor of 2, and next time you did these types of toolpaths you should get a much more accurate estimate, and this can be tweaked over time. Now typically most people will have a scale factor for different types of toolpaths. So for instance, simple 2D profiling and pocketing may be one scale factor, but then if you've got software capable of V-carving or 3D machining, then you may have different scale factors for those types of operations in order to get the most accurate estimate that you can. The other area of the Toolpath Summary form is the notes down the bottom here. What these allow you to do is to associate information with the selected toolpath. So this may be just as a reminder if you're opening the part again and working with it in future, or it can also be used to actually create data that if you have the right entry in your post processor can be extracted into the code that you send to the machine. So this may be information that can be useful to see in there if you're taking a look at that at the machine itself. Here I may just want to give myself a reminder, so in this case if I select text profile, I know with that toolpath that I want to run the pocket first before I machine that, so I could just set a reminder to run pocket first and hit apply, and now that's associated with that toolpath. If I click on the others you'll see that disappears. If I go back to that one, I'll see the notes. As I say, this is only really beneficial to me if I come back to this file at a later date and I want to remind myself of something. Let's go ahead and close the Toolpath Summary form now. And at this stage, we've completed this tutorial and shown you a lot of the techniques that are involved in administrating and working with the toolpaths in the Toolpath list. Thanks for watching.